Chapter 1. Neil Armstrong's Moonwalk. The Lunar Resort had opened only 6 months earlier, and it was already the most sought-after destination for weddings, funerals, and extravagant vacations. Nestled on the edge of the Sea of Tranquility, the resort catered to humanity's fascination with the moon, offering a luxury experience unlike any on Earth. It was a place where dreams of space exploration became a reality, at a price. The most popular attraction by far was the Lunar Spacewalk, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reenact Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon. Tourists flocked from all over the world for the privilege of planting a flag and reciting his famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." For safety reasons, minors were rarely allowed to partake. The risks of radiation exposure and the physical strain of low gravity made the experience better suited for adults. But James's family had paid extra, a lot extra. It was a reward, they told him, for being such a good sport about his father's upcoming marriage. They hoped it might help him feel more included. James wasn't sure how walking on the moon was supposed to make him feel better about his dad marrying Gretchen. But he wasn't about to turn down the chance to do something cool. He had spent the last week feeling like a prop in his father's picture-perfect new life, so the idea of doing something for himself felt good. The day of the spacewalk began with a briefing in the resort's airlock bay. James stood in an oversized white spacesuit surrounded by a group of tourists, eagerly chatting about how surreal it was to be on the moon. The guide's voice crackled over the comms as she explained the itinerary. "This is a faithful recreation of the Apollo 11 landing," she said. "We'll be driving out to the historic site in a lunar rover. Once there, each of you will have the chance to climb the stairs and take your own first steps on the moon. And of course, you'll plant a flag and capture the moment with a photo. Now remember to stay tethered to the rover at all times. Safety first." The group shuffled into the rover, a large, boxy vehicle with reinforced windows and sleek seats. James sat near the front, staring out as the resort's domed structure grew smaller and smaller, eventually blending into the vast gray horizon. As the rover rumbled across the lunar surface, James couldn't help but feel a small thrill. The low gravity made the ride feel bouncy, almost weightless, and every bounce sent up a cloud of fine lunar dust. Out here, away from the resort, it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you realize how alone you were in the universe. After about 20 minutes, the rover came to a stop. The guide announced, "We've arrived at the Apollo 11 landing site. This is where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made history 250 years ago. Now it's your turn to take your first steps." The rover's doors opened, and James followed the group down the ramp. His boots crunched against the lunar regolith as he gazed at the metal staircase that extended from the rover. It was designed to mimic the ladder of the original lunar lander, complete with a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." One by one, the tourists climbed the stairs, their movements clumsy and slow in the bulky suits. When it was James's turn, his heart pounded in a way he hadn't expected. He ascended the steps, gripping the rail tightly as the low gravity made each movement feel exaggerated. At the top, the guide handed him a replica of the American flag. He planted it firmly into the ground, just as Neil Armstrong had done all those years ago. A camera mounted on the rover captured the moment as he recited the famous words. He had to admit, for just a second, it felt good. Looking out at the vast, barren landscape, James realized how insignificant he felt. The moon had a way of making you small, like one star in a universe of millions. He descended the stairs and shuffled back to the group, unsure if the experience had made him feel better or worse. The rover ride back to the resort was just as quiet as the ride out. James watched the tourists chatter about how amazing the experience was, but he stayed silent. He wasn't sure how to explain what he was feeling. As they re-entered the resort, the airlock hissed shut behind them, and James felt the artificial gravity take hold again. The magic of the moon was gone, replaced by the reality of his father's new life and his own uncertain place in it. Chapter 2. Find Your Path. James trudged through the airlock, his steps heavy despite the low lunar gravity. The thrill of the spacewalk had already worn off, leaving behind a weight he couldn't shake. Around him, the industrial look of the airlock was a stark contrast to the polished glamour of the resort. The walls were lined with exposed pipes and reinforced panels, more engineering than luxury. Control consoles blinked faintly in the corner, manned by technicians in simple uniforms. This part of the station was built for function, not aesthetics. The captain, a tall man with graying hair and a calm demeanor, noticed James lagging behind the rest of the group. While the other tourists laughed and shared their experiences, James seemed withdrawn. The captain approached him as he struggled to remove his bulky spacesuit. "Here, let me help," the captain said, kneeling to release the latches on James's helmet. The hiss of decompression sounded as the helmet came off, revealing James's flushed and tired face. "Thanks," James mumbled, avoiding eye contact. The captain handed James a towel to wipe his face, then gestured for him to sit on a nearby bench. "So, how was it?" "Not every kid gets to walk on the moon." James shrugged. "It was fine, I guess." "Fine." The captain raised an eyebrow. "Most people are over the moon after that experience, no pun intended." James smirked slightly but didn't respond. The captain waited patiently, sensing there was more to this silence. Finally, James sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "After the wedding, I'm getting shipped off to boarding school," James said quietly. "I'll probably never see my dad again, and even if I do, it'll be under the supervision of my stepmother, Gretchen." The captain sat down next to him, his presence steady and non-judgmental. "Why do you think you won't see your dad again?" "Because she's evil," James said, bitterness creeping into his voice. "She'll make sure of it." The captain chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Evil, huh? You know, I've met a lot of brides on the moon. Bridezilla, they call most of them. But your stepmother? She's actually one of the most patient, accommodating brides I've dealt with so far." James scoffed. "This place is new. Give it time, and there'll be plenty of brides much kinder than Gretchen." The captain laughed. "Fair point, but still, it's not all bad. Sometimes you have to lose your footing to find your path." James frowned, confused. "What does that even mean?" The captain looked at him thoughtfully. "It means everything happens for a reason. You're going through a tough time now, but it's leading you somewhere. Somewhere you might not expect. It always works out in the end." James leaned back, considering the captain's words. He didn't fully believe them, but there was something reassuring about the man's calm conviction. "Thanks," James said finally. "I guess I needed to hear that." The captain stood and patted James on the shoulder. "Anytime. And hey, if you need a break from all the wedding chaos, you know where to find me." As James watched the captain walk away, he glanced around the airlock. The industrial hum of machinery filled the space, a reminder of the work and ingenuity that made the Lunar Resort possible. It wasn't flashy or perfect, but it served its purpose, just like the captain's words. Maybe, James thought, losing his footing was the first step to finding his own path. Chapter 3. The Bridal Suite. The bridal suite was everything James imagined it would be, fancy, modern, and suffocatingly pristine. The room had a futuristic design straight out of a sci-fi movie, with sleek, curved furniture and soft, ambient lighting. A loft above the main living area housed a plush bed surrounded by silvery drapes, overlooking a mini kitchen and bar. The real showstopper, though, was the wall of windows. They offered an unobstructed view of the lunar surface, its barren gray expanse stretching endlessly under a backdrop of inky black sky dotted with stars. The Earth hung suspended in the distance, a glowing blue marble. But James wasn't paying attention to any of that. He was too busy watching Gretchen, his soon-to-be stepmother, pace furiously back and forth across the room. "You're late," she snapped at his father, her voice tight with frustration. "The wedding planner is waiting for me to finalize the menu. Do you know how hard it is to coordinate a lunar wedding? I've been trying to reach you for an hour." "We lost track of time," James's dad said with a shrug, still in his spacesuit from the earlier walk. "The spacewalk ran long." "Well, maybe next time you could check your messages," she shot back, grabbing her data tablet from the counter. She didn't even glance at James, who was sitting on the couch, pretending to be invisible. James's father sighed and turned to him. James, stay put, okay? Gretchen and I need to take care of this. When we're done, you and I can go play miniature golf. James didn't bother responding. He just nodded, staring down at the smooth surface of the coffee table. A few seconds later, Gretchen swept out of the room with his father trailing behind, leaving James alone in the expansive suite. As soon as the door slid shut, James grabbed the holo display from the counter. The device hummed to life, projecting a three-dimensional hologram of his best friend Parker back on Earth. Parker was lounging in his bedroom, the faint glow of city lights visible through the window behind him. "Hey, James, how's the moon?" Parker asked, leaning forward in the hologram. James flopped onto the couch, letting out a dramatic sigh. "It sucks. I'm stuck in this fancy prison. My dad and Gretchen treat me like I'm 5 years old. I can't even walk around the resort without supervision." Parker laughed. "Sounds rough, man. At least you're on the moon. I just got my hover car, and it's been awesome cruising around the city." "You got a hover car?" James sat up, momentarily distracted. "I want to drive it when I get back." "You got to take lessons first," Parker said with a smirk. "You can't just hop in and go." James groaned, leaning back against the cushions. "Great. Another thing I'm not allowed to do. I'm stuck here, treated like a kid, and when I get back, I need lessons for a stupid car." Parker grinned. "Well, at least you've got the skywalk. That sounds cooler than a hover car." James rolled his eyes. "Yeah, because walking on a simulated lunar surface with a bunch of tourists is so much better than driving a hover car." "Come on, man. You're literally on the moon. How many people can say that?" James didn't answer. Instead, he stood and wandered to the balcony, the hologram following him as he moved. He slid open the glass door and stepped onto the balcony, where the hot tub sat under the glass dome. The air was warm and slightly humid, a stark contrast to the cold vacuum of the moon just beyond the dome. "Hold on," James said, setting the holo display on the edge of the tub. He climbed in, sinking into the steaming water and letting out a small sigh. The view of the lunar surface stretched out in front of him, stark and beautiful, but he didn't really see it. "I just feel like I can't do anything," James admitted, picking up the conversation. "My dad's too busy with Gretchen to care, and she definitely doesn't want me around. It's like I'm not even part of the family anymore." Parker's hologram flickered slightly as he leaned closer. "That sucks, dude, but you're gonna be fine. You're tough." James scoffed, letting his head fall back against the edge of the tub. "Tough, sure, but I'd trade all of this for a little freedom." "Hey, at least there's still miniature golf," Parker teased, trying to lighten the mood. James let out a small laugh despite himself. "Yeah, miniature golf, living the dream." The call ended shortly after that, and James sat in the hot tub for a while, staring out at the lunar horizon. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like his. Nothing here did. Chapter 4. The Lunar River. James lingered in the bridal suite for a while after his call with Parker, but the walls felt like they were closing in. The futuristic luxury of the room couldn't distract him from the gnawing sense of isolation. His dad's words about staying put echoed in his mind, but James had no intention of following orders. Not tonight. He grabbed his holo display, slipped on his shoes, and left the suite, the door hissing shut behind him. The Lunar Resort was massive, a labyrinth of sleek hallways and glowing panels that led to various themed modules. The further he walked, the more determined he felt to shake off the frustration of his situation. After wandering for a bit, James found himself at the entrance to the lazy river module. A soft mist drifted out as the doors slid open, accompanied by the faint sounds of tropical music and birdsong. He stepped inside, greeted by a humid warmth that felt worlds away from the sterile coolness of the rest of the resort. The module was designed to replicate a lush jungle, complete with towering tropical trees and dense foliage. It was easy to forget he was on the moon until he looked up. The massive glass dome overhead revealed the stark black expanse of space and the faint glow of Earth in the distance. A holographic tiger prowled in a cage just beyond the entryway, its movements eerily lifelike. James paused, staring at the shimmering beast as it roared softly and pawed at the bars. Past the tiger's enclosure, a wooden walkway bridge stretched over a shallow pool leading into the heart of the module. To his left, A large birdcage housed a brightly colored holographic parrot. The bird squawked and flapped its wings, tilting its head to watch James as he passed. The air was thick with humidity, the warm moisture clinging to his skin. It was as if the jungle had been transplanted to the moon, complete with the sound of rushing water and the sweet, earthy scent of tropical plants. James followed the sound of laughter and splashing until he reached the main pool. The lazy river wound around it in a slow, meandering loop, dotted with guests lounging on brightly colored tubes. The water sparkled under soft, artificial lighting, its surface reflecting the green canopy of leaves above. James grabbed a tube from the stack near the edge and eased himself into the water. He let the current carry him, trying to relax, but his thoughts kept circling back to the conversation with Parker and the wedding he wanted no part of. As he drifted around a bend, he spotted her. A girl about his age was floating ahead of him, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail. She was laughing with a friend, the sound light and carefree. Something about her drew James's attention, and before he could second-guess himself, he paddled closer. "Hey," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm James." She turned, raising an eyebrow. "Hi, James." He hesitated, suddenly unsure what to say. "So, I was wondering, would you want to, maybe, go to a wedding with me tomorrow?" The girl blinked, surprised. "A wedding?" "Yeah," James said quickly, trying to explain. "It's my dad's wedding. You don't have to stay long or anything. I just thought it might be cool to have someone to talk to." Her expression shifted, and James immediately regretted asking, "Look, that's nice of you, but I don't even know your family. That'd be super awkward. And I didn't pack anything for a wedding, so no thanks." James tried to smile, but it felt forced. "Right, yeah, no problem. I get it." The girl gave him an apologetic shrug before pushing off her tube and drifting away. "Good luck with the wedding, though." "Thanks," James muttered, watching her disappear around the curve of the river. He let his arms drop, the tube bobbing slightly as the current carried him along. He had hoped for a distraction, something to make him feel less invisible, but the rejection stung. He floated aimlessly for a while before deciding he'd had enough. Climbing out of the water, James grabbed a towel from the rack and made his way back to the suite, dripping and deflated. The lazy river module had promised an escape, a temporary reprieve from the weight of his problems. But as James stepped back into the cold, metallic hallway of the resort, he realized that no matter how much he tried to distract himself, the loneliness always followed. Chapter 5. How the Resort Works. James shuffled into the airlock, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. The cold, sterile air felt sharper here, different from the humid warmth of the lazy river module. The industrial hum of machinery surrounded him, a stark reminder that this part of the resort wasn't built for luxury. It was built for survival. He stared at the rows of spacesuits lined neatly along the wall. Each suit gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its smooth white surface unmarred by scratches. They looked ready for adventure, for escape. James stepped closer, running his fingers along the cold, glossy material of one helmet. For a moment he imagined himself suiting up, stepping into the airlock and walking straight out onto the lunar surface, alone. "You thinking of taking one for a spin?" A warm, cheerful voice broke through his thoughts. Startled, James turned to see a large man with broad shoulders and a jolly smile. The name patch on his coveralls read Remy. He carried a small diagnostic tablet in one hand and a toolkit in the other. No," James said quickly, stepping back from the spacesuit. "Just looking." "Well, good thing you didn't touch anything too important," Remy said with a hearty laugh. "These babies might look tough, but they're sensitive. Everything's got to be checked, double-checked, and triple-checked before a guest puts one on." James nodded, unsure of what to say. Remy's energy was infectious, though, and James found himself relaxing slightly. "You want to help?" Remy asked, holding up his tablet. "I could use an extra set of hands." James hesitated. "I don't really know how to do whatever it is you're doing." "That's the beauty of it," Remy said, setting his toolkit down on a nearby bench. "You're about to learn. Come on." Remy led James to a row of spacesuits, each one tethered to the wall by a series of cables and tubes. First thing you do is check the diagnostics, Remy said, tapping his tablet. Here, I'll show you. He handed James the tablet and pointed to a blinking icon. This one's for oxygen flow. You want to make sure it's green. If it's yellow, it needs a tune-up. If it's red, well, he grinned. Let's just say you wouldn't want to wear that suit. James followed his instructions, swiping through the diagnostic screen and checking the readings. Green, he said, feeling a small surge of accomplishment. Attaboy, Remy said, clapping him on the back. You're a natural. They worked their way down the line of suits, with Remy explaining each step in his cheerful, easy-going manner. As they moved, he shared bits about his life, how he was from Hawaii, how he'd grown up climbing coconut trees and fixing boats, and how he'd jumped at the chance to work on the moon when the resort opened. What about you, kid? Remy asked. What brings you all the way up here? James hesitated, then shrugged. My dad's getting married. I'm just along for the ride. Ah, Remy said knowingly. Family stuff. That's always complicated. After they finished with the suits, Remy gestured toward a console on the far wall. Now for the fun part. Airlock diagnostics. You ready? James nodded, following Remy to the console. The screen displayed a detailed schematic of the airlock and its various systems. Remy showed James how to check the seals, monitor oxygen levels, and test the pressure. This place runs like clockwork, Remy said as he guided James through the process. But only because we make sure everything's working like it should. Safety first, always. When they were done, Remy led James to a metal hatch in the corner of the airlock. He opened it to reveal a narrow staircase leading down. Come on, he said. There's something else I want to show you. They descended into the lower level, which was filled with rows of humming equipment. The air here was cooler, the lighting dimmer. Remy walked over to a console and pointed to a series of glowing panels. Every module has its own life support system, he explained. Gravity plating, oxygen, power, backups, you name it. And if one module goes down, the neighboring module picks up the slack. It's a multi-redundant system. The more modules spaceport adds to the resort, the safer it gets. James stared at the panels, impressed despite himself. So, like, nothing can go wrong? Remy laughed. Well, let's not get carried away, but we're prepared for just about anything. As they climbed back up to the airlock, James felt a little lighter. For the first time since arriving at the resort, he'd done something useful, something that mattered. Thanks for letting me help, James said. Any time, Remy said with a grin. And remember, kid, every system's got backups. Even you. You'll figure it out. James didn't quite know what Remy meant, but he liked the sound of it. As he left the airlock and headed back toward the suite, he realized he felt just a little less alone. Chapter 6. Trouble. When James returned to the bridal suite, the door slid open with a soft hiss. He stepped inside quietly, half hoping no one would notice his absence. The suite was bustling with activity. Gretchen was in the bedroom area, trying on her rehearsal dinner dress, while his father sat at the sleek glass table, intently focused on his holo display. Where have you been? His father asked without looking up, his tone more weary than angry. Just exploring? James replied casually, dropping onto the couch. His father sighed, still tapping away on the holo display. We asked you to stay here, James. This place is huge, and we don't need you wandering off. I'm not a little kid, James muttered under his breath. What was that? His father finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. Nothing, James said, but the edge in his voice was clear. Gretchen emerged from the bedroom, adjusting an earring. Is everything okay? She asked, glancing between them. James decided to take a self-guided tour, his father said, a hint of irritation creeping in, even though we specifically asked him to stay put. Gretchen pursed her lips but didn't say anything. She turned back toward the bedroom. I need to shower before dinner, she said, more to herself than anyone else. James watched her disappear, a flicker of mischief igniting in his mind. His father was already engrossed in his holo display again, scrolling through options for his bachelor party. Images of poker tables, virtual reality gaming rooms, and zero-gravity lounges hovered above the device. Hey, Dad, what's that? James asked, pretending to be interested. Just trying to set up a poker night with the guys, his father replied, distracted. The resort's booking system is a bit convoluted. Need any help? James offered, stepping closer. His father smiled faintly. Thanks, but I think I've got it. James nodded and backed away, his father's attention fully captured by the screen. Seizing the opportunity, he slipped into the hallway that led to the suite's maintenance access. He'd noticed the panel earlier when exploring the suite, a small, unobtrusive door that blended seamlessly with the wall. Glancing over his shoulder to ensure he wasn't being watched, James opened the panel and crawled into the narrow space beneath the floor. The hum of the suite's systems surrounded him as he navigated the cramped area. He remembered Remy's explanations about the resort's modular systems, and while he wasn't an engineer, he figured it wouldn't be too hard to find the controls for the hot water. A series of pipes ran along the low ceiling of the crawl space, each labeled with glowing text. He squinted until he found the one marked hot water supply. With a twist of a valve, he shut it off. A small pang of guilt tugged at him, but he brushed it aside. It wasn't like he was causing any real harm. Crawling back out, he closed the panel and returned to the main area of the suite. His father was still absorbed in his planning, oblivious to James's absence. Satisfied, James sat back down on the couch, trying to look nonchalant. Moments later, a sharp cry echoed from the bathroom. "What on earth?" Gretchen exclaimed. "Why is there no hot water?" His father looked up, confusion crossing his face. "That's odd," he said, standing up. "Maybe there's an issue with the suite systems." Gretchen appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a plush robe, her hair damp. "I can't get ready without a shower," she said, clearly frustrated. "Can you call maintenance?" "What about the sonic shower? Can you use that instead?" he asked. "You know I hate taking sonic showers. Can you have them fix it?" she replied. "Of course," his father replied, activating the suite's communication panel. He glanced at James. "Did you notice anything off while we were gone?" James shrugged. "Nope. Everything seemed fine to me." Before his father could respond, the communication panel connected to the front desk. As he began explaining the issue, James felt a mix of satisfaction and anxiety. Part of him knew this was petty, but another part reveled in the small act of rebellion. A few minutes later, after arranging for maintenance to check the issue, his father ended the call and turned to James. "Are you sure you didn't touch anything?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Why would I touch anything?" James replied defensively. "I was just sitting here." His father studied him for a moment, then sighed. "James, I need you to be honest with me. Did you leave the suite again?" James hesitated. "I might have stepped out for a bit." "James," his father exclaimed, exasperation evident in his voice, "we asked you to stay here for a reason. This isn't a game. You can't just wander off whenever you feel like it." "Why not?" James shot back. "It's the moon. Where am I going to go? It's not like I'm going to leave the resort." "That's not the point," his father said firmly. "You're not following instructions. This is a critical time for all of us, and I need to know that I can trust you." "Trust me?" James scoffed. "You don't even listen to me. You and Gretchen are so wrapped up in your own world, you don't care about what I want." "That's not true," his father replied, taken aback. "We brought you here to be a part of this experience." "You brought me here to keep up appearances," James snapped. "You don't actually care if I'm involved or not." His father's expression hardened. "That's enough. I won't tolerate this attitude. Go to your room and get ready for dinner. We'll discuss this later." "Fine," James muttered, pushing past him and heading toward his bedroom. As he walked away, he heard Gretchen's voice from the bathroom. "Did you get it sorted?" she asked. "Maintenance is on the way," his father replied, his voice weary, "but we might be late for dinner." James shut his bedroom door behind him, leaning against it for a moment. The confrontation had left him feeling a swirl of emotions, anger, frustration, and a lingering sadness. He hadn't expected his small act of sabotage to make him feel this way. He glanced around his room, the sleek furnishings and ambient lighting feeling cold and impersonal. Crossing to the window, he gazed out at the lunar landscape. The moon's barren surface stretched out endlessly, a stark reminder of his isolation. "Maybe I did go too far," he whispered to himself. But another part of him pushed back. Why should he be the only one miserable here? If his father and Gretchen wanted to ignore him, maybe they deserved a taste of his frustration. A soft chime sounded from his door. "James, are you getting ready?" His father's voice called out. "Yeah," James replied, not moving from the window. "Good, please hurry." He waited until he heard his father's footsteps retreat before turning away from the window. Slowly, he began changing for dinner, his mind a jumble of conflicting thoughts. Part of him wanted to apologize, to make things right, but another part couldn't shake the feeling that no one was truly listening to him. As he adjusted his collar in the mirror, he wondered how much longer he could keep this up. The moon felt both vast and confining, and he was trapped somewhere in between. Chapter 7. Rehearsal Dinner. James sat alone at the massive circular dining table, staring at the futuristic centerpiece hovering a few inches above its surface. The holographic display rotated slowly, shifting from a glowing blue moon to a dazzling array of stars. The dining module was as over-the-top as the rest of the Lunar Resort, sleek metallic walls with soft ambient lighting that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. The ceiling was a giant projection screen simulating a vibrant aurora borealis that shifted colors every few minutes. It should have felt magical, but to James, it felt cold. The table was too big. James couldn't shake the sense that it had been designed to make its occupants feel small. He tapped his fingers against the smooth, seamless surface, which changed color slightly with each touch. Around him, other families and groups dined at smaller tables, their laughter and conversation blending with the faint hum of the module's air circulation system. James slouched in his chair, wishing he could disappear. Gretchen's family had barely spoken to him since arriving on the moon, and now they weren't even here. His dad had promised dinner would be a chance for everyone to bond, but instead, they were all running late. He tried not to look like he cared, but sitting alone at the table only amplified the hollow ache in his chest. The sliding door at the edge of the module hissed open, and James glanced up. His eyes widened in surprise. "Uncle Barry?" Barry strode in, his broad shoulders and easy grin immediately filling the room with warmth. His godfather looked as out of place as James felt. His slightly rumpled blazer and open collar clashed with the ultra-modern surroundings, but Barry's confidence made it work. "Hey, kiddo," Barry said, pulling out the chair next to James and sitting down. "Fancy meeting you here." James blinked. "I didn't know you were coming." "Last-minute invite," Barry said with a shrug. "Gretchen's family probably wanted to balance out the table. Can't have too many of her relatives ganging up on you, right?" James snorted softly. "It wouldn't make a difference. They barely notice I'm here." Barry's smile faded as he studied James's face. "You okay, James? You look like someone stole your space boots." James hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know, it's just this whole thing. Gretchen's family acts like I don't exist. My dad's too busy with the wedding to notice. I feel like, I don't know, the ugly duckling or something." Barry leaned back, crossing his arms thoughtfully. "That's a rough spot, no doubt about it. But you know what happened to the ugly duckling, right?" James rolled his eyes. "Don't say it." "He turned into a swan," Barry said, grinning. "And not just any swan, the most awesome swan in the pond." "Thanks, Uncle Barry. Very inspirational," James said, but he couldn't help the faint smile tugging at his lips. A server approached, placing 2 steaming plates of glowing blue soup in front of them. The broth shimmered like liquid starlight, and tiny floating orbs bobbed to the surface with each stir. James poked at it with his spoon, half expecting it to start glowing brighter. Barry dug in enthusiastically, slurping a spoonful. "Not bad," he said. "Tastes like chicken noodle soup from Mars." James wasn't hungry, but he took a sip out of politeness. The soup was warm, savory, and slightly salty, but it did little to improve his mood. "So," Barry said, setting his spoon down, "what's the plan for the summer? Boarding school keeping you busy?" James shrugged. "I guess. It's not like I have any other options." "Well," Barry said, leaning in conspiratorially, "what if I told you there's an open spot at my place in the Hamptons? Beach house, killer waves, plenty of room to escape all this." He waved a hand, gesturing to the grandeur around them. James stared at him, unsure if he'd heard right. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Barry said. "I could use some company, and you could use a break from all this family drama. What do you say?" James hesitated, his mind racing. The thought of escaping boarding school and Gretchen was tempting. But would his dad even let him go? "I'll talk to your dad," Barry added, as if reading his thoughts. "Don't worry about that part. Just think it over." For the first time in days, James felt a flicker of hope. "Thanks, Uncle Barry. I'll think about it." "Good," Barry said, giving him a reassuring pat on the back. "Now eat your soup before it gets cold. You don't want to waste good lunar cuisine." James smiled, the warmth of the moment making the futuristic dining module feel just a little less lonely. Chapter 8. A New Friend. The hum of the resort's automated systems was the only sound as James slipped out of the bridal suite, careful not to make any noise. He knew his dad would blow a gasket if he found out James had sneaked out again, but the thought of staying cooped up in that room for another minute made his skin crawl. He wandered aimlessly through the brightly lit corridors of the Lunar Resort, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floors. Signs for various modules glowed softly on the walls, pointing the way to the lazy river, the observation deck, and, James paused, a bowling alley. Curiosity piqued. He followed the signs until he reached the entrance. Inside, the bowling alley was a vibrant mix of retro charm and futuristic flair. The lanes glowed softly under neon lights, the pins hovered a few inches above the ground, and holographic animations played on the scoring displays. A faint, nostalgic smell of popcorn and wax polish lingered in the air. James stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. Most of the lanes were empty, but one near the far end was in use. A boy about his age was lining up a shot, his stance casual yet confident. The hoverball in his hand glowed faintly as he released it, sending it gliding smoothly down the lane. The ball struck the pins with a satisfying clatter, scattering them in all directions. "Strike!" the boy exclaimed, pumping a fist in the air. James hesitated, unsure if he should approach, but before he could decide, the boy turned and spotted him. "Hey, you looking to bowl?" he called out, flashing a wide grin. "I could use some competition." James shrugged, trying to play it cool as he walked over. "Sure, why not?" The boy introduced himself as Al, and within minutes they were taking turns bowling and trading stories. Al had an easygoing charm, the kind of confidence that made him seem instantly likable. "Where are you from?" James asked after his first turn, in which the hoverball veered wildly off course and missed the pins entirely. "Hawaii," Al said, grinning. "North Shore." "Ever been?" James shook his head. "What's it like?" "Paradise," Al said, leaning against the ball return. "Waves taller than this ceiling, sunsets that make you believe in magic, and the best coconut trees you'll ever climb." "You climb coconut trees?" James asked, raising an eyebrow. "Of course," Al said with a laugh. "Well, when I was younger. These days you can usually find a good one on the ground, but where's the fun in that? You've got to earn your coconut, you know." James found himself laughing along, captivated by Al's stories. Al talked about night dives in glowing waters, bonfires on the beach, and the rush of catching a perfect wave. Each story painted a vivid picture of freedom and adventure, a stark contrast to James's life of rules and expectations. "What about you?" Al asked, tossing him the hoverball. "What brings you to the moon?" James hesitated, spinning the ball in his hands. "My dad's getting married. It's this big, fancy thing." "Lucky you," Al said, but his tone was light, not sarcastic. "What's the wedding like?" James sighed, lining up his shot. "It's fine, I guess. Gretchen, my stepmom-to-be, has this huge family and they're all here, but they don't really talk to me. I'm just kind of there." He released the ball, watching as it wobbled down the lane and knocked over two pins. Al didn't seem to notice the poor shot. "Yeah, families can be complicated," Al said, leaning on the railing. "But, hey, at least you've got a cool story to tell. Not everyone gets to say their dad got married on the moon." James laughed bitterly. "Yeah, a great story. I went to the moon and still felt like I didn't belong." Al frowned, studying James for a moment. "You know," he said slowly, "I used to feel like that. Like I didn't belong. Then I realized, belonging's not about them, it's about you. Find your people, and the rest doesn't matter." James glanced at him, surprised by the wisdom in his words. That easy, huh? Not easy, Al admitted, but worth it. By the end of the night, James was grinning as Al taught him how to improve his throw. His next shot wasn't perfect, but it was better, and Al gave him a high five as the holographic display erupted in animated applause. Not bad, Moon Boy, Al teased. Next time I'll show you how to hit a golf ball out here. It's not surfing, but it's close. James laughed, feeling lighter than he had in days. As they left the bowling alley, Al promised they'd meet up again, and James returned to the suite with a small smile on his face. For the first time since arriving at the resort, he didn't feel entirely alone. Chapter 9. The Lunar Nursery. The hydroponics pod was nothing like the rest of the Lunar Resort. Gone were the sleek metallic walls and glowing neon accents. Here, the air was warm and humid, filled with the earthy scent of plants and the faint tang of nutrient-rich water. James followed Al through a long, brightly lit corridor lined with transparent pipes. Inside the pipes, tiny green plants floated, their roots bathed in mist as water and nutrients circulated through the system. This is where the magic happens, Al said with a grin, gesturing to the rows of hydroponic tanks. Almost all the food served at the resort is grown here, space farming at its finest. James squinted at a nearby panel displaying rows of data in a language he didn't understand. You mean to tell me all that fancy stuff at dinner came from here? Yep, Al said, tapping on the panel. Lettuce, tomatoes, even some of the fish. It's all grown or cultivated in pods like this. It's sustainable and pretty cool. James nodded, impressed despite himself. The module felt alive in a way the rest of the station didn't. It wasn't just a place for humans to relax and indulge. It was where life itself thrived. The orchard level. They climbed a narrow spiral staircase to the next level. When Al opened the hatch, James's jaw dropped. The orchard level was massive, a sprawling biodome filled with rows of fruit trees stretching as far as he could see. The ceiling was a translucent dome, filtering simulated sunlight that made the whole space feel like a tropical paradise. Welcome to the orchard, Al said, stepping aside to let James take it all in. Pretty wild, right? This is where they grow the good stuff, bananas, oranges, even coconuts. James raised an eyebrow. Coconuts? On the moon? Why not? Al said with a laugh. Come on, I'll show you. The two boys weaved through the trees, passing bunches of bananas dangling from thick stalks and rows of apple trees heavy with fruit. Al finally stopped beneath a towering coconut tree, its rough bark climbing high into the artificial sky. Ever climbed one of these before? Al asked. James shook his head. Not exactly a big thing where I'm from. Well, today's your lucky day, Al said, already gripping the trunk. He scaled the tree with surprising ease, grinning down at James from the top. Your turn. James hesitated, staring up at the tree. What if I fall? You're on the moon, dude, Al said. Gravity's on your side. Just don't let go. With a deep breath, James grabbed the trunk and started climbing. It was harder than Al made it look, but the reduced gravity helped. By the time he reached the top, his arms ached, but he couldn't help smiling at the view. The orchard spread out beneath them, a lush green oasis in the middle of a barren world. Not bad for a beginner, Al said, handing him a coconut. Now let's get down before the crew catches us. Opening the coconut back on the ground, Al placed the coconut on a flat rock and handed James a small, sharp tool. Okay, first you pierce the top to drain the water. James followed Al's instructions, carefully puncturing the coconut. A stream of clear liquid poured out, and Al handed him a cup to catch it. That's the good stuff, Al said. Fresh coconut water. Give it a taste. James took a cautious sip, and his eyes widened. That's actually really good. Told you, Al said, grabbing a larger tool. Now, we crack it open, he demonstrated, striking the coconut along its seam until it split neatly in half. Then he handed the tool to James, who repeated the process with some difficulty, but eventually succeeded. You're a natural, Al said, handing James a piece of the white flesh. Go ahead. Try it. James took a bite, the sweet, nutty flavor surprising him. For the first time in days, he felt a genuine sense of accomplishment. and joy. As they sat beneath the tree, enjoying their coconut snack, James couldn't help but let his mind wander back to the wedding. "You know," he said, "this is the first time I've actually felt like I'm not stuck here." Al looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" James shrugged. "It's just everything else feels like it's about my dad and Gretchen. This question mark, this feels like my thing." Al nodded thoughtfully. "Well, maybe it can be. You've got to carve out your own space, you know? Even on the moon." James smiled faintly. "Maybe. But it's hard to do that when everyone keeps telling me what to do." Al grinned. "That's why you need friends who'll show you how to climb trees and break the rules." James laughed, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in what felt like forever. As they walked back through the orchard, James couldn't stop smiling. The taste of fresh coconut lingered on his tongue, and Al's words echoed in his mind. For once, he felt like he wasn't just along for the ride. He was part of something, and maybe, just maybe, he'd figure out how to carve out his own space after all. Chapter 10. The Wedding. The Grand Event module was a marvel of futuristic engineering. The transparent dome overhead framed a breathtaking view of space, with Earth hanging in the distance like a polished blue gem. Rows of glowing chairs floated slightly above the floor, forming a perfect circle around the central aisle, which shimmered softly underfoot. Holographic floral arrangements hovered in the air, their colors shifting subtly with the mood of the ceremony. James sat near the back of the venue, feeling smaller than ever in the face of all the grandeur. The ceremony hadn't even started, and already he wished he could disappear. Gretchen's family dominated the front rows, chatting animatedly and laughing in their perfectly coordinated outfits. His dad was up front, fussing with the holographic officiant, making sure everything was just right for the big moment. Meanwhile, James sat alone, fiddling with the cuffs of his suit jacket. The chair beneath him glowed faintly every time he moved, adding to his irritation. He glanced at the aisle, where glowing panels illuminated with each step someone took. It was all so extra. "James." His father's voice cut through his thoughts. He turned to see his dad standing nearby, looking exasperated. "Can you sit still for once? You're distracting the other guests." James clenched his jaw. "Sure, Dad. Wouldn't want to ruin the perfect wedding." His dad didn't even seem to hear the sarcasm as he turned back to the front. James slumped further into his seat, muttering under his breath, "I didn't even want to be here." The ceremony began with a soft hum as the holographic officiant flickered to life at the center of the aisle. The translucent figure spoke in a soothing, melodic voice, welcoming everyone to the union of Gretchen and James's father. As the music swelled, the glowing floor panels shifted to a warm gold, and Gretchen appeared, stepping onto the aisle with a radiant smile. James couldn't deny that she looked stunning in her futuristic gown, which seemed to shimmer with its own light. The bioluminescent wristbands she and his father would exchange glowed faintly in her hands. The whole scene looked like something out of a science fiction movie, polished, perfect, and completely detached from reality. James crossed his arms as the ceremony progressed. His father beamed at Gretchen, reciting his vows as holographic images of Earth and the moon danced around them. Gretchen's family watched with misty-eyed adoration, hanging on every word. "So, how does it feel to finally have your family together?" One of Gretchen's relatives whispered loudly to her neighbor as though James couldn't hear. His stomach twisted. He stared at the glowing floor, wishing it would swallow him whole. "Family? Yeah, sure, as long as I don't count." By the time the reception began, James was on the verge of snapping. The dome transformed seamlessly, with glowing tables rising from the floor and humanoid service robots gliding between them, delivering plates of extravagant food. The holographic floral arrangements shifted to a cooler palette, casting a serene glow across the room. James found himself at a table surrounded by Gretchen's extended family. They barely acknowledged him as they chattered about business deals and vacation homes. One of them, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair, turned to James and asked, "How are you enjoying the wedding, dear?" "It's fine," James said curtly. "Just like every other wedding on the moon, I'm sure." The woman blinked, startled by his tone, before quickly turning back to the others. James stabbed at the glowing entree on his plate, barely noticing the way the bioluminescent sauce shimmered with every movement. The breaking point came during the toasts. A man from Gretchen's family stood, raising his glass. To Gretchen and her new husband, we're so happy to see him moving on and starting fresh. Here's to a new chapter. The words hit James like a punch to the gut. His mother's memory, his entire past, it was as though none of it mattered. His face burned and he stood abruptly, ignoring the curious glances from the table. I need some air, he muttered, pushing his chair back and heading for the exit. James found himself on an observation deck, staring out at the lunar surface. The desolate expanse stretched endlessly before him, dotted with craters and bathed in the faint glow of Earthlight. For a moment the silence was comforting, a stark contrast to the noise and chaos inside. He felt the tears prick at the corners of his eyes, but blinked them away. I'm not crying over this. Not here. Hey! A familiar voice broke the silence. James turned to see Al leaning casually against the doorframe. Figured I'd find you here? James shrugged, turning back to the window. Just needed to get away. Al walked up beside him, glancing out at the surface. Weddings can suck, he said simply. James huffed a laugh despite himself. Yeah, this one especially. Well, Al said, clapping him on the back, you're on the moon, dude. Let's make the most of it. Come on, I've got an idea. For the first time that day, James felt a flicker of relief. Maybe he couldn't fix what was broken, but at least he didn't have to face it alone. Chapter 11. Falling into Despair. James followed his father down the brightly lit corridor, the soft hum of the resort's systems filling the silence between them. His father carried a small duffel bag, while James trailed behind, hands shoved deep into his pockets. I thought you'd like this, his father said, glancing back with a tight smile. It's your own space. You've been sharing the suite with us, and, well, Gretchen and I, we need some privacy. It's the wedding night, after all. James rolled his eyes. He didn't need the details. Yeah, great, thanks. His father stopped in front of a door that looked like every other in the corridor, marked only by a glowing panel beside it. He swiped a key card and the door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small but sleek room inside. James stepped past him, tossing his bag onto the floating bed. The room was surprisingly nice. The walls glowed softly, and the large window offered an unobstructed view of the lunar surface. A desk with a holodisplay sat in one corner, and a built-in closet lined the opposite wall. It wasn't the bridal suite, but it was quiet. Private. You'll be comfortable here, his father said, lingering awkwardly in the doorway. There's a holodisplay if you need entertainment, and room service is available through the console. Just stay put, all right? Don't wander off again. James snorted. Sure. Where am I going to go, Dad? The moon's not exactly crawling with excitement. His father sighed, ruffling James's hair in a way that felt more dismissive than affectionate. I'll see you in the morning. James watched the door slide shut behind him, and for a brief moment he felt a flicker of relief. No more Gretchen, no more fake smiles or awkward dinners. Finally, some space to himself. Discovering the lockdown. The first thing James did was walk to the holodisplay desk, swiping his hand over the console to bring it to life. The screen blinked on, glowing faintly as a menu of options appeared. He scanned the list, looking for something to kill the time. Mini-golf, bowling, maybe even the observation deck. He tapped the icon for the observation deck, but instead of confirming his request, the screen flashed red. Access denied. Parental controls enabled. James frowned, tapping it again. The same message appeared. What the? He muttered, standing up and walking to the door. He pressed his hand against the glowing panel, but the same red light pulsed, followed by a low beep and another message. Room locked. Parental controls enabled. Realization dawned on him, and the flicker of relief he'd felt earlier vanished. You've got to be kidding me, he said aloud, pressing the panel again, harder this time. The system didn't budge. The weight of isolation. James turned back to the room, his chest tightening. It wasn't just a room anymore, it was a cage. His father hadn't given him space. He'd locked him away like some unruly child who couldn't be trusted. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the softly glowing walls. They seemed to pulse faintly, as if mocking him. The view from the window, which had felt calming moments ago, now only emphasized how trapped he was. Out there was freedom, vast and endless, and here he was, stuck. James grabbed a pillow and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a muted thud and slid to the floor. "This is so stupid," he muttered, running his hands through his hair. His father thought this would help, that locking him away would somehow make everything better. He thought about calling his dad, demanding an explanation, but what was the point? His dad wouldn't understand. He'd just give the same patronizing response he always did. "It's for your own good, James. We're trying to protect you." The view outside. James walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. The moon stretched out before him, a barren expanse of gray craters and shadows. In the distance, the faint glow of a rover's headlights traced across the surface, a reminder of the world continuing on without him. Earth hung in the void, beautiful and distant. It looked so close, yet it might as well have been 1,000,000 miles away. That was home, where his real life was, where his mom's memory still lingered. Here, on the moon, everything felt wrong, alien. His chest ached with the weight of it all. His mom was gone. His dad had moved on. And now, he was stuck, literally and figuratively, in a life that didn't seem to have room for him. A quiet resolve. James stayed by the window for a long time, staring out at the lunar surface. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the resort systems. He wasn't sure what he wanted or what he was supposed to do, but one thing was clear. He couldn't keep going like this. For now, all he could do was wait. But he wouldn't stay locked up forever. Chapter 12. Out of Place. James laid on his bed, staring at the softly glowing ceiling of his locked room. The conversation with his dad replayed in his mind, fueling his frustration. He was sick of this place, sick of the rules, and sick of being treated like a problem that needed managing. He grabbed the holo display from the desk, swiped to the communications menu, and selected the familiar contact. After a few moments, his best friend's face appeared, projected in the air before him. "James!" his friend exclaimed, leaning back in their chair with a grin. "How's the moon treating you, man? Got your own rover yet?" James groaned, rubbing his temples. "Don't even start, Evan. This place sucks." Evan tilted his head, eyebrows raised. "You're on the moon. How exactly does that suck?" Venting the frustration, James didn't hold back. He launched into a detailed recounting of everything that had gone wrong. His dad's obsession with the wedding, Gretchen's family ignoring him, the way his dad locked him in his room, and how out of place he felt in this entire situation. As he talked, the frustration bubbled to the surface, spilling out in sharp words and bitter complaints. "And then my dad acts like it's all fine, like I should just be okay with him marrying someone who doesn't even like me." James finished, sitting up and gesturing wildly. "It's like I don't matter anymore." Evan was silent for a moment, studying James's expression. Then, with a small smirk, he said, "Wow, I never thought I'd see the day. James, the cool kid, having a pity party." James scowled. "Thanks for the support." "I'm serious, though," Evan said, leaning closer to the projection. "This isn't you, man. Normally, you're the one people look up to, the guy who shrugs stuff off and figures it out. What happened to that James?" Evan's perspective. James sighed, lying back on the bed. "Maybe that James got left back on Earth. I don't know, dude. This place just sucks the life out of you." Evan snorted. "You mean this place where you're spending break on the freaking moon? Yeah, that's so hard to handle. Must be awful looking out your window and seeing Earth." James frowned. "You don't get it." "Maybe not," Evan admitted. "But can I be honest with you, James? As your friend?" James hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, I'm jealous," Evan said simply. "You get to spend break on the moon. Not too many kids can say that. Meanwhile, I'm stuck at home, arguing with my sister over the last waffle." James opened his mouth to argue, but Evan cut him off. "Look, I get that things aren't perfect with your dad and Gretchen, but 4 years, man, 4 years, and we're out of high school making our own rules. Might as well enjoy the journey while we can." The disconnect. James let the words sink in, but they didn't comfort him the way Evan probably intended. "It's not that simple," he muttered. "It's not just about being here. It's about Everything. My dad, my mom, Gretchen. It's like none of it makes sense anymore. Evan's expression softened. I get that. But James, you're still lucky. Not because you're on the moon or whatever, but because you've got a shot to figure it all out. You're not stuck forever. James didn't respond. He wanted to believe Evan, but the weight of everything still pressed down on him. He mumbled a quick goodbye and ended the call, tossing the hollow display onto the desk. For a moment the room was silent again, the soft hum of the resort systems the only sound. Alone again. James stared out the window at the lunar surface. His friend's words lingered in his mind, but they didn't erase the hollow feeling in his chest. Evan didn't get it. How could he? He wasn't here. He wasn't dealing with this mess of a family, this prison of a room, this overwhelming sense that nothing would ever feel right again. For now, all James could do was wait and hope that something, anything, would change. Chapter 13. The Escape. James sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the softly glowing walls of his locked room. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the resort systems. The earlier call with Evan hadn't helped. If anything, it made the weight of his isolation feel heavier. He was trapped, physically in the room and emotionally in a life he didn't want. A soft beep from the door panel startled him. He looked up as the door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing Al's grinning face. "What are you doing here?" James asked, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. "Rescuing you, obviously," Al said, holding up a sleek black card. "Master key. Got it from Nadim. Guy was too busy flirting to notice I swiped it." James blinked. "You stole the master key?" "Borrowed," Al corrected with a wink. "Now are you coming, or are you just going to sit here and mope?" James didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and followed Al into the corridor, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and anxiety. As they walked briskly through the empty halls of the resort, James couldn't help but ask, "How'd you even get it? Nadim doesn't seem like the type to let his guard down." Al smirked. "Turns out, assistant captains are just like everyone else. Put a pretty girl in a bikini at a pool bar and their attention goes right out the window." James chuckled despite himself. "You're ridiculous." "Ridiculously effective," Al said, holding up the card again. "Anyway, I saw him leave it on the bar while he was showing off. Just a quick slip of the hand and voila. Moon's your oyster." The thought of Al swiping the card from under Nadim's nose made James feel lighter, even if only for a moment. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of control returning to his life. Al led James to a secluded section of the resort, a small observation deck tucked away from the main tourist areas. The glass dome overhead offered a clear view of the lunar surface, bathed in soft earthlight. It was quiet, serene, and entirely free of the chaos James had been drowning in. James leaned against the railing, staring out at the craters. "Thanks, Al. I needed this." "No problem," Al said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Figured you were about to lose it in there." "I already have," James admitted, his voice low. "It's just everything. My dad, Gretchen, the wedding. I don't belong here." Al looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, sometimes it's not about belonging. It's about making your own place, even if it's just for a little while." James frowned, mulling over the words. "Easier said than done." "Yeah," Al agreed. "But it beats sitting around waiting for things to get better. Sometimes you've got to make your own escape." James smirked. "Literally in this case." As the boys sat under the dome, Al tapped the master key against his knee. "So, what's next? You want to hit the golf course? Sneak into the hydroponics pod again? Or maybe take a joyride in a rover?" James laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "Let's start with not getting caught. My dad would kill me if he knew I was out here." "Sounds like a plan," Al said, grinning. "But for now, enjoy the moment. Freedom's not guaranteed, you know." James nodded, looking back out at the vast, empty surface of the moon. For the first time, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt peaceful. As they returned to the resort's main corridors, Al handed James the master key. "Keep it, just in case." James stared at the card, feeling its weight in his hand. It wasn't much, but it was something, a symbol of the control he was slowly starting to regain. "Thanks," he said quietly. "Don't mention it," Al replied. "But if Nadim asks, you've never seen me before in your life." James laughed again, pocketing the card. For the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe. Maybe he wasn't free yet, but at least now he had a way out. Chapter 14. Breaking Point. James awoke to the sound of the door panel hissing open. He groaned, pulling the blanket over his head, but it didn't stop his father's sharp voice from cutting through the quiet. "Get up, James. Breakfast is in 20 minutes and you're not making us late." James rolled out of bed, rubbing his eyes as his father stood in the doorway, arms crossed and expression tight. Why even bother? Not like anyone's going to miss me. His father's brow furrowed. "I don't know how you got out of this room last night, and frankly, I don't care. But let me make one thing clear. This behavior ends now. When we get back to Earth, you're going straight to boarding school, and you'll stay there until the end of the year. No breaks, no trips home." James's stomach sank, but he refused to let his father see how much the words stung. "Fine," he muttered, brushing past him. "Let's just get this over with." The tense walk to breakfast. The corridors of the resort felt colder that morning, or maybe it was just James's mood. His father walked a few steps ahead, his posture stiff and unyielding. James trailed behind, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I don't understand you, James," his father said without looking back. "You've got every opportunity in the world, and you throw it away for what? Breaking rules? Acting out? Do you think that's going to get you what you want?" James didn't respond. He didn't trust himself to speak without the anger bubbling over. Instead, he focused on the sound of their footsteps, echoing in the empty hallway. "You need to grow up," his father continued. "This isn't a game. Life doesn't revolve around what you want." James clenched his fists but kept walking. His father's words felt like a lecture aimed at a stranger, not his own son. Breakfast with the wedding party. The dining module was bustling with activity when they arrived. The wedding party filled the room with laughter and conversation, their voices blending into a cheerful hum. James scanned the crowd, but no one even glanced his way. "Go find a seat," his father said curtly. "I'll join you when I can." James didn't bother responding. He grabbed a plate of food from the buffet and found an empty table near the corner of the room, far from the lively chatter. He sat alone, picking at his food as the noise of the party washed over him. From his spot, he could see Gretchen holding court at the center of the room. Her family gathered around her in a tight circle. His father was there too, smiling and laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. James stabbed at his eggs with his fork, the frustration building in his chest. This is their family now, he thought bitterly. Where do I even fit? The turning point. As the breakfast wore on, James's isolation deepened. No one came to check on him. No one even seemed to notice he was there. He pushed his plate aside and stared out the window, his thoughts spiraling. He thought about the conversation with his dad, the locked room, the wedding, and everything that had gone wrong since they'd arrived on the moon. It felt like the weight of it all was crushing him, and he didn't know how to stop it. Finally, he stood, leaving his half-finished breakfast on the table. He didn't know where he was going, but anywhere was better than here. Chapter 15. Leaving the station. James wandered aimlessly through the resort, his mind clouded with frustration and a growing sense of despair. The breakfast had been the final straw. Watching his father laugh and joke with Gretchen's family, ignoring him entirely, had cemented what James already felt deep inside. He didn't belong here. He didn't belong anywhere. He found himself in a quieter section of the resort, far from the bustling activity of the main modules. The corridors grew narrower, the walls losing their sleek sheen in favor of a more utilitarian design. The faint hum of machinery filled the air, a reminder that even here, on the moon, everything was manufactured, controlled. Before he realized it, he was standing outside the airlock. Rows of spacesuits lined the walls, their visors reflecting the soft glow of the corridor lights. The door to the airlock stood silently ahead, its control panel blinking steadily. James hesitated, his thoughts racing. He wasn't sure why he'd come here. Maybe he just wanted to get as far away from the resort as possible. Maybe he wanted to feel something real, something raw, something that didn't involve holograms or glowing furniture or people who didn't care about him. His hand drifted to his pocket where the master key Al had given him rested. He pulled it out, staring at the sleek black card. It felt like a lifeline. Without thinking, he slid it into the airlock's control panel. The lights on the door blinked green, and it hissed open. Stepping into the unknown. The airlock was cold and stark, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the resort. James moved quickly, grabbing one of the spacesuits and stepping into it. He struggled with the unfamiliar clasps and seals, but determination fueled him. With a hiss, the suit pressurized, and the heads-up display blinked to life inside the helmet. Oxygen levels stable. Life support online. The door to the lunar surface loomed ahead, and James hesitated again. Am I really doing this? But the question felt meaningless. He'd already decided the moment he swiped the key. He pressed the panel to open the outer door. The airlock decompressed with a faint hiss, and then, with a rush of stale air, the door slid open, revealing the barren expanse of the moon. Walking on the surface, the lunar surface stretched endlessly before him, a sea of gray dust and shadows. Earth hung in the sky, a glowing reminder of everything he felt so far away from. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft hiss of his suit's life support system. James stepped out, his boots kicking up tiny clouds of moon dust with each step. The gravity felt lighter here, freeing, as though the weight of everything he carried on his shoulders had lessened. For the first time in days, he felt untethered, unbound. He started walking, not knowing where he was going or why. The resort shrank behind him, its glowing domes growing smaller with every step. Out here there were no walls, no locked doors, no judging eyes, just him and the vast, empty surface. The captain's discovery. Back in the control room, the captain sipped his coffee, reviewing the morning's activity reports. The resort was quiet. Most of the guests were still asleep. For a moment, everything seemed routine. Then something caught his eye on the monitor. A figure, small and barely visible, was moving across the lunar surface. The captain leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the screen. What the hell? He tapped the console, zooming in on the figure. It was a person in a spacesuit, walking away from the resort. His stomach sank. This wasn't part of any scheduled activity. The captain called his number 2 in command. Nadim! Nadim was still asleep. He worked late last night. Groggy Nadim responded. Was there a spacewalk scheduled this morning? Was there maintenance or something I didn't know about? The captain barked into his comm. No, sir, Nadim replied. Someone is out there. I have a terrible feeling this is bad. We've got someone on the surface. Chapter 16. Gathering the team. The control room buzzed with activity as the captain paced, his eyes darting between the screens displaying the lunar surface. The figure on the monitor was still moving, their small frame barely distinguishable against the vast gray landscape. He stopped abruptly, leaning toward the comm panel. Nadim, get up here now, the captain barked. A few moments later, Nadim stumbled into the room, his uniform slightly rumpled and his expression groggy. Sir, what's going on? The captain pointed at the screen. Someone's out there walking on the surface. It wasn't scheduled and there's no maintenance log. I need you to confirm their identity and coordinate with security. Nadim's eyes widened as he processed the image on the screen. That's not supposed to happen. We don't even have an EVA planned for today. Exactly, the captain said sharply, which means whoever that is decided to take matters into their own hands, and I don't think they've thought it through. Mobilizing the team. The captain hit the comm switch again, his voice echoing through the resort's secure channels. This is the captain. All security personnel report to command immediately. We have an unscheduled excursion on the surface. Within minutes, the control room was filled with activity. Members of the resort security detail arrived, their sleek, futuristic uniforms reflecting the room's blue glow. The captain quickly briefed them, pointing to the monitor where the lone figure trudged further into the lunar wilderness. We need to establish communication with whoever that is, the captain ordered. Nadim, patch into the suit's communication system. If they're wearing one of ours, we should be able to override and contact them. Nadim nodded, fingers flying over the console as he attempted to tap into the suit's comm frequency. Working on it, sir? One of the security officers stepped forward. Do we know how far they've gone? The captain shook his head. Not yet, but I'll be going after them. The rest of you stay here and assist with tracking their location and keeping the resort informed. The captain prepares. The captain moved briskly to the airlock where a rover sat prepped for emergency excursions. He slipped into a spacesuit with practiced ease, his movements quick but methodical. He'd done countless spacewalks in his career, but this felt different. This was personal. As he secured his helmet and activated the suit's life support systems, Nadim's voice came through the comm. Captain, I've established a partial connection. It's definitely one of our suits. Still no response, though. Keep trying, the captain replied, climbing into the rover. Let them know I'm coming. The rover's engines hummed to life, and the vehicle rolled out onto the lunar surface. The resort's biodomes grew smaller in the rear-view monitor as the captain focused on the path ahead. The figure was still visible in the distance, a solitary speck against the gray expanse. Inside the control room, Nadim monitored the figure's movements while relaying updates to the captain. They're slowing down, but they're still moving. Oxygen levels on the suit should be holding for now. Any sign they've noticed the comms? The captain asked, his voice calm but tense. None yet. It's like they're ignoring us, or don't know how to respond. The captain gripped the rover's controls tighter. Let's hope they haven't gone too far. I don't want to bring back a body. As the rover closed the distance, the figure came into clearer focus. The captain could see their hesitant, unsteady steps, the way they paused every so often to look around. Whoever it was, they weren't running. They were lost. I see them, the captain said into the comm. I'll make contact soon. Be ready for anything. He slowed the rover to a crawl, his heart pounding as he prepared to step out and approach the mysterious person on the surface. Chapter 17. The Rescue. The rover rolled to a stop a few meters away from James, its headlights casting long shadows across the gray lunar surface. Inside, the captain adjusted the comm system, his voice calm but firm as it patched directly into James's spacesuit. James, it's Captain Monty. I need you to listen to me. James froze mid-step, his breath catching in his helmet. The faint hiss of his suit's oxygen system filled the silence as he turned to face the rover. For a moment he considered ignoring the voice, but something in the captain's tone gave him pause. I'm not here to yell at you or drag you back, the captain continued. I just want to talk. Can you do that for me? James hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay. Good, the captain said. Now, why don't you come inside the rover? It's a lot easier to talk in here than out there. James glanced at the rover, its open hatch glowing invitingly. The thought of sitting in an enclosed space with another adult was almost unbearable, but the emptiness of the lunar surface pressed on him like a physical weight. Reluctantly, he began walking toward the vehicle, a heart-to-heart. Once James climbed inside, the captain helped him remove his helmet and suit, stowing them neatly in the rover's storage compartment. The cabin was compact but warm, with soft lighting and a hum of machinery that made it feel oddly comforting. James slumped into one of the seats, his arms crossed defensively. You're just going to lecture me, aren't you? The captain shook his head as he took the driver's seat. No lectures, just a conversation. But first, I need to know. What was your plan out there? James looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have one. I just wanted to keep walking until the oxygen ran out. The captain let out a slow breath, his expression softening. That's not a plan, James. That's giving up. I know, James said bitterly, but it's not like anyone cares. My dad's got his new family, and I'm just extra. I don't fit in anymore. The captain's wisdom. The captain leaned back, folding his hands over the steering controls. You know, James, when I was your age, I felt the same way. My family didn't have much, and I thought the world didn't care about me. That's why I joined the Navy, because I thought escaping was the only option. James frowned. Did it work? In some ways, yeah, the captain admitted. But I learned something important along the way. You can't always change the people around you, but you can change how you deal with them. Sometimes the best thing you can do is build your own life, one that makes you proud. James didn't respond immediately, staring at his hands. It's just
hard. Everything feels wrong. I get it, the captain said, but it won't always be this way. And if things ever get too bad, you're welcome to come back here. The moon's not a bad place to start over, and I've got a little pull to make it happen. James glanced up, surprised. You do that? The captain smiled. Of course, but I have a feeling you'll figure things out on your own. After a moment of silence, the captain glanced at the rover's dashboard. The wedding party's leaving today, right? James nodded. Yeah. Well, the captain said, leaning forward, is there anything you haven't done yet? Something you'd regret missing? James hesitated, then said, the golf course. My dad was going to take me, but things got messed up. The captain grinned. The golf course it is, then. Let's make it happen before you go. And what do you say we invite Al along? James's eyes lit up, a small smile breaking through his sullen demeanor. Really? You'd let him come? Why not? The captain said, starting the rover. But first, one thing. Do you have the master key? James pulled the sleek black card from his pocket, holding it out. Yeah, here. The captain took it with a nod. Thanks. Let's keep this between us, okay? No need for Nadim to know how it got out of his hands. James chuckled for the first time in days. Deal. As the rover turned back toward the resort, James felt a small but undeniable shift in his chest. The moon still felt alien, and his family situation hadn't changed, but for the first time, he didn't feel completely alone. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better.
Chapter 18. The Golf Game. James couldn't believe it when the captain brought it up on the way back to the resort. A quick game of golf, huh? The captain said as they exited the rover. I'll pull a few strings and set it up. You'll leave the moon with at least one fond memory. Now, standing at the entrance to the station's golf module, James felt a small wave of nervousness. The module was a sleek dome made of shimmering glass panels that bathed the artificial greens in a soft golden glow. It didn't look like a traditional golf course. It was a futuristic marvel. Inside, holographic obstacles shifted and shimmered, and the gravitational field was dynamically adjusted to mimic lunar conditions, making every swing an adventure. His father and Al stood beside him, both grinning. For once, the tension between them seemed to have melted away. This must be Al, James's father said, extending a hand toward the boy. I've heard a lot about you. Al shook his hand confidently, his characteristic grin in place. Good things, I hope. Mostly good, his father said with a chuckle, glancing at James. Thanks for convincing the captain to set this up, James. I know it's been a rough trip, but I'm glad we get to do this together. James shrugged, trying to play it cool. It was his idea, really. Well, I'm proud of you, his father said, clapping him on the shoulder. Now, let's see if you've got what it takes to beat me. Sci-Fi, Golf on the Moon. The course was unlike anything James had ever seen. The first hole featured a floating holographic bunker that shifted its position every few seconds. The second hole had a sloped surface that mimicked the undulating terrain of the moon, complete with craters. Each hole came with its own set of challenges that blended technology and creativity, making the game both unpredictable and exhilarating. Remember, the ball's trajectory is different with lower gravity, the captain explained as he handed out their clubs. You'll want to adjust your swing accordingly. Think smooth and controlled. Al grabbed a club and practiced a few swings. This is wild, he said, his excitement obvious. Reminds me of surfing back home. James's father raised an eyebrow. Surfing? You're from Hawaii? Yep, Al said. Born and raised, my dad's a naval captain and my mom's family runs a bunch of resorts on the islands. I grew up climbing coconut trees and catching waves. Sounds like a dream, James's father said, lining up his shot. I've always wanted to visit Hawaii. You should, Al replied. Maybe James can come with me next time. James smiled, appreciating Al's easy charm. For once, the tension he usually felt around his father seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. As they worked their way through the course, James found himself enjoying the game more than he expected. His father was surprisingly patient, offering tips and encouragement instead of criticism. By the fifth hole, James even managed to sink a tricky putt, earning a rare compliment from his dad. "Nice shot, kiddo," his father said, clapping him on the back. "Looks like all that practice is paying off." James felt a flicker of pride, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "Thanks." Al, meanwhile, kept the mood light with stories of his adventures in Hawaii, from dodging sharks while surfing to sneaking into the best luau's. Even the captain joined in, sharing a few tales from his time in the Navy. By the final hole, the group was laughing and joking like old friends. For the first time since they'd arrived on the moon, James felt a sense of connection, not just with Al, but with his father. As they finished the game and returned their clubs, James's father turned to him. "I'm glad we did this. I know things haven't been easy, but I'm proud of you, James." The words hit James harder than he expected. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. "Thanks for including me," Al said, flashing his usual grin. "This was awesome." "It wouldn't have been the same without you," James's father replied. As they walked back toward the main module, James couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. Chapter 19. Return to Earth. James leaned back in his seat, the gentle hum of the transport's engines reverberating around him. Through the wide window beside him, the lunar surface stretched out in a breathtaking expanse of gray and silver. The resort's biodomes shimmered faintly in the distance, their glass panels catching the sunlight like tiny jewels scattered across the moon. It was beautiful, more beautiful than he'd ever let himself admit during his stay. A quiet farewell. As the transport ascended, the details of the resort blurred into the vastness of the lunar terrain. James pressed his forehead against the cool glass, his eyes tracing the contours of the surface he had walked on just hours ago. The moments he'd spent out there, alone and with the captain, felt like a lifetime ago, yet they had left an indelible mark. He thought of Al, grinning as he demonstrated how to climb a coconut tree in the biodome. He thought of his godfather, Uncle Barry, and his quiet reassurance at the rehearsal dinner, and he thought of the captain who had risked everything to bring him back from the brink, literally and figuratively. Most of all, he thought of his father. The golf game, though brief, had been a rare moment of connection. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Reflection. James closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. The moon had taught him something he hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the surface beauty or the marvel of walking in low gravity. It was about finding perspective, about learning to stand in the vastness of it all and realizing that even when things felt impossibly small or lonely, they could also be profound. For the first time, he didn't feel as angry. His father's new marriage still stung, and boarding school loomed ahead like an unyielding sentence. But the ache of it was softer now. There were new pieces to his life, and maybe in time they could fit. A bittersweet goodbye. As the transport broke free of the moon's orbit, Earth came into view, a blue and green marble suspended in the infinite black of space. James felt his chest tighten at the sight. It was home, and yet, in a strange way, the moon now felt like it had a piece of him too. The comm system crackled, and the captain's voice came through one last time. "Safe travels, James. You've got a bright future ahead of you." James smiled faintly, his fingers brushing the edge of the seat. "Thanks, Captain." Embracing the future. The transport sped toward Earth, leaving the moon and all its memories behind. James knew he'd miss it. The biodomes, the golf course, the lazy river, even the stark loneliness of the airlock. But as the stars blurred outside the window, he also felt something new, hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid to find out.